Hello, everyone. I am Elizabeth Corey. I am the founder of beatingtrauma.com, and we are going to talk about our trauma responses today. There are a lot of people out there that talk about isolation, especially in regards to trauma recovery, as a bad thing. And I'm going to give a slightly different perspective about it today. And for those of you who have been following me a while or even working with me, you will probably find this to be a familiar discussion, but it's also one that's so important for us. So I'm gonna talk about it again, but I will give you some different perspectives on it too. The first thing I want to say about isolation is that it is true that abusers use isolation against us, and therefore that can make isolation in general a re-traumatizing experience. They want us to feel alone. But one of the things that often gets missed, especially when we're operating in this world from the controller and the love seeker, which a lot of us are, is abusers will often use relationships against us. The more obvious example is, of course, the abusive relationship is causing us problems on a relationship level. But they will also use other relationships against us. For example, and this may sound mostly conspiracy theory oriented, but I want you to keep an open mind about what I'm saying, but oftentimes abusers will use other people as informants. They'll gain information from people that they will then use against us to make us really feel pretty hopeless, especially when we're children. They will drive wedges into our relationships, or they will turn people against us. Now, a lot of times they're doing this to meet their own, their own ulterior motives, which is to make sure that we don't connect with people too much and start talking to them about what we're experiencing. I mean, that is the clear number one reason why abusers will both isolate us and use our relationships against us. So we can potentially see re-traumatization both in isolation and in a relationship. I want to make it clear that sometimes it isn't about kind of villainizing isolation and saying that's always going to be re-traumatizing. Kind of in favor of being in a relationship. And I'm not just talking about intimate relationships. A lot of times it's about finding balance, right? It's about allowing ourselves that time to ourselves, like to be in isolation, period, while also exploring relationships in a very slow, connected to self kind of way. Because I'll be honest, one of the biggest red flags in relationships is when we find someone we want to know and we drop everything in our lives, including who we are, to try to make that relationship work. So we want to watch for those kind of behaviors because they are never good. Despite that our love seeker is probably saying, that's the answer. This is the be-all and all. This is going to solve all my problems. My savior has come, right? We may be hearing that stuff, but I could tell you that generally, relationship, while it can heal us, it can cause us just as much trauma as isolation. So we need to be cautious about both, and we need to find a balance between. But we don't want to say that one is necessarily worse for us than the other. Yes, humans are relational beings. We are social creatures. That is so true. But we want to make sure that the way we are socializing is not recreating a whole lot of traumatic experiences and building our traumatic cycles in our lives to a point where the only thing left for us to do is dissociate. Because once we dissociate in those relationships, we are officially in re-traumatization. Like, that's where we're at. So we want to keep these relationships out of that sphere of re-traumatization, but taking them slow, taking lots of pauses, and balancing those relationships with time to ourselves, right? So isolation has its benefits in our healing journey. So it's really about bringing in the balance. I am not somebody who's going to sit there and tell you that it has to be a total isolation or nothing. No, but we need to increase the caution in our relationships, slow them down, and take lots of time for ourselves to process what we're experiencing, and really connecting with ourselves to make sure we are okay with what is happening around us. I'll be honest, we can't always do that. when we are in non-stop relationship mode. So I'm going to talk about 3 reasons why isolation helps us today. But again, I want to keep bringing it back to this idea of balance. That's really ultimately what we are looking for in this journey. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is that we have to keep in mind that our defenders and love seeker, for different reasons, will use external relationships to pull us away from ourselves as they search for an external solution to how we feel. Okay? So we must understand, and it's very hard to remember this when it's happening, but we must understand that there will be some level of attempting to create external, even drama. Honestly, external drama, external difficulties, external struggles with other people in order to pull us away from ourselves. Because within ourselves is a whole bunch of emotions and triggers, memories that the defenders do not want us looking at. The problem is when they pull us out into these relationships, especially ones with heavy traumatic cycles to them, where we're seeing a big repeat from our childhoods. When they pull us into those kind of relationships, we lose that connection to self, and we start as the trauma is recreating, we start putting all our focus on trying to fix how we feel external to self, right? That's what we're doing. We lose complete track of the fact that now we've moved into survival mode. We're now using survival mechanisms, and I'll be honest, most survival mechanisms do not come with any significant grounded. As a matter of fact, quite the opposite. Most survival mechanisms in relationship, okay, these are mechanisms we developed as children that we use in relationship, are very powerless. They don't come with a lot of grounded adult self-power. And we don't see that if we're too mired in those traumatic cycles. We can't catch it. We're too dissociative to really pick up on it. I don't know if you heard me there, but unfortunately, in the end, we will actually become re-traumatized. Generally speaking, if the other person we're relating to is actually bringing out those old patterns, that means they're probably not emotionally very healthy themselves. So, but this can be a distraction technique. It is a distraction from self, and we want to just bring awareness to that may actually be going on in our lives. I'll be honest, when our defenders are doing this to us, it's very hard to see what they're doing. We're gonna miss it a lot. Okay, we are. But if we can catch it, when we can catch it, it's very powerful. And we can stop doing some of those survival skills that aren't really helping us out. And you may be wondering, what the heck is a survival skill that I might be referring to? It's one of the biggest ones that come out of traumatic environments, when we are dealing with childhood trauma. It's going to be things like pleasing the other person to the point where we lose ourselves, right? That's probably one of the biggest patterns that we will get ourselves into, because we discovered as children we really had no ability to set boundaries or have any real power in relationship. So we moved into this mode of just trying not to get the person upset enough with us that they traumatize us. And when we take that into our adult relationships, it does not work to our trauma. It's quite. Let's see. Are there other survival skills that may seem like they're more powerful, like being really angry, exploding at people, pushing people away? Okay, yes, those exist too. But they are in fact still coming from a really ungrounded, powerless place where we are using these emotions to get space from another person because we don't feel safe with them. The real nothing we have to relearn pretty much from scratch is setting boundaries with people. That is the number one way to get the space that we need. But oftentimes that feels just too scary to the dissociated parts that are active and actively moving in the direction of using our survival mechanisms. So when we let ourselves be alone a little bit, sometimes we can go with what we want in the relationship instead of always putting the focus on what others want in the relationship. We can't do that. There's no downtime. There's no time where we're not relating. It's honestly one of the reasons why people who are not healthy will love bomb, because when we are love bombed, we usually don't get enough space to see what's happening. And it hooks that love seeker in, and the pleasing begins, and then that person sort of gains control over us. And so taking time for ourselves, even during potentially a love bombing phase, will allow us to see what is happening. That's where isolation really can become our friend, so we can kind of get a sense of what's happening. So that's the number one thing that isolation does for us. The number two thing isolation does for us is it helps reduce the level of invalidation we may be experiencing from others. This is so important, because when we are trying to change our perspective or our belief systems, okay, we have often met people while we have those other perspectives and belief systems that still believe those things. And so oftentimes when we're starting to make changes, I'm speaking from a ton of experience here, when we started to make changes, we may go to people to get validation, to feel like we're moving in the right direction. And what we may hear from those people is, nope, that's a bad idea, right? They may encourage your survival skill. They may encourage you to keep believing what you believed before, because that's what they believe, right? So sometimes in order to make a significant inner change with us, which then of course does lead to different actions, it requires us to be really grounded and connected to self and validating ourselves, because the people that are currently in our lives are not necessarily fans of those types of decisions. It doesn't mean that nobody in your friend group can support you in a pretty big change, but we do have to be cautious, because we're only going to make that change if other people tell us that it's right. We might get ourselves a bit stuck, generally speaking, because a lot of people that are currently in our friend groups may not be able to do that for us. I have found this to be true many times as I've changed my life, as I've made some pretty big, kind of risky decisions. I generally not found very many people that told me it was a good idea. And now when I look back on those decisions, they were actually the best ones that I ever made. But I really did need to be in some level of isolation to know, to really ground into my inner knowing, and know that this was right for me. To be very intuitive required me to be somewhat isolated, because I was still really driven towards the opinions of others as being more important than my own. I'm not in that place now, but I was. And it could be very difficult when you're geared towards believing that other people know better than you, and every other person is telling you, don't do that, don't do that. Don't do that, don't do that, don't do that, right? That's very hard. So in many cases, it wasn't until I got alone and could go, wait, what do I believe? Sometimes it takes a while to figure that out. But once I got to a place where I could ask the question and sit with myself, I was able to make those changes. But I really needed to separate myself from people who were still just not willing to go there, or maybe too driven by their fear to kind of see what it was that I was doing, why it was good for me. I'll be honest, most people just couldn't do it. And not even have people come back to me who I was closer with than I am. So I can't believe that worked out for you. Oh, yeah. And in the end, it did. It did work out for me. So Carol is saying, and why is we always go to the wrong person for advice? And that's, we do, generally speaking. And a lot of that is that recreation of our traumatic relationships that does happen, unfortunately. And many times our defenders, especially our defenders who find these decisions very risky, will even drive us towards the wrong people, because they want us to come to ourselves. So we may even have sort of an internal sabotage thing, especially for the parts that carry more fear than other parts, kind of pushing us in the direction of those people who are going to tell us not to do those things, or going to give us just advice that doesn't really suit where we are. So, and the last one I want to talk about, I've sort of already talked about it, but I'm going to talk about it again really quickly, which is that isolating gives us that pause. It gives us that time to connect with ourselves, right? To really connect with ourselves and explore all of our views about something. And sometimes this means exploring the views that aren't even the right views for us, but that live in our system in maybe a very ungrounded way. Sometimes I refer to this, my clients will know this phrase, which is, I call it the round table. So the round table is when we sit and we look at every perspective that we can get a sense of in our system. I'll be honest, most of the time when we really want something, we also have the perspective of really wanting it. We might not be able to hear that side very well, which is why isolation is such a powerful thing, because it can give us that opportunity to see it. When we take those moments to kind of be by ourselves and really connect with ourselves and connect with all the perspectives in our system, it does help to ground us into the perspective that's actually best for us in the moment, because the best decision for us is the grounded decision. But contrary to how controllers think about the world, the best decision is not necessarily the one with the least risk or the one with the least emotional response in our system either. Sometimes we have a pretty strong fear response to the best decision for us. So we aren't going to really know that or be able to work with that very well unless we are taking that time to be alone and really connect with ourselves. Because the truth is that notion that if it's meant to be, it will just be easy and come truly is actually not the case. If it was meant to be and we had no resistance to it at all, then yes, that would be true. But we have resistance, sometimes strongest resistance, to the things we are supposed to be doing the most, if I'm honest. So don't believe the hype that says you won't have any fear if it's what you're meant to do. You definitely will. You will have fear if it's what you're meant to do. And it can be very helpful to sit with ourselves to kind of get a sense of that. And there's also another term I sometimes use here, which is resistance writing. Resistance writing is when we sit down with a concept that we feel pretty sure is the right direction for us, and we write from the parts that resist that decision. Most of that is going to be fear, but there's going to be shame in there too, telling us not to do it. And then, of course, sometimes at the most high level, we're going to get a significant utility attack there that says it's never going to work out. So don't bother. So that's a hopelessness showing. So there's lots of things on a resistance level that we can work with to help us make better decisions. But most of those things are going to require us to be spending some time on our own, right, by ourselves, so that we can do that deep connection to self and deeper work with those emotions that are good. So that's what I have for you guys today. I hope you found this helpful. I just really want to counter some of the messages out there that say that all healing has to happen in a relationship. I am not agreeing with that, which you probably already do. I don't believe that at all. I think there is a ton of healing that happens when we're on our own and connecting with self. So maybe what we can say is that healing happens in a relationship with self, because yes, that is 100% true. It does happen in a relationship with self. And then other relationships are great for showing us where relational patterns are that are not working for us. But let's put a little more focus on relationship with self, and we will see the results of that. And they will be a really good thing in the long term, but maybe not right now, because there's a lot of emotion process in order to do that. But yeah, we're making a huge investment in the future when we do that. Thank you all so much for being here. I look forward to talking to you next week. Thank you all, and I will talk to you soon. Bye.